What's up, y'all? It's been a chaotic National Signing Day Eve, probably even more so than anticipated with a coaching change going into the early signing period. And so chaotic times call for, I'm going to say, desperate measures as we get Jacob Coltson's first appearance on the Louisiana vs. Loyola channel, at least in front of the camera. Folks that follow some of the high school football coverage, particularly on Friday nights, may recognize his voice from asking some questions post-game of some talented players up there in the 318 after games. But this will be the first time Jake has been on. There's so much to unpack. Sam Spiegelman and I couldn't connect today to do a Recruit That Boot episode. We're going to get back to that later this week, but there's just too much going on to ignore right now. And Jacob, I know you've been trying from afar to kind of keep up with some of it while I have my head spinning around like I'm on a damn carnival ride or something going on today. But how we doing, man?
Oh, it's been a day. You know, I knew it was going to get kind of crazy going into tomorrow, but it was just kind of one after another, and I was like, okay, we got some stuff going on here. It's hard to keep up with. It was kind of after one after another.
There was a point this afternoon, I guess, around the time that airline receiver Kenny Darby announced his decommitment, and then Tioga wide receiver Kervin Johnson Jr. announced his flip from LSU to Ole Miss, that you were like texting me something as I was still trying to finish one story and another story was already happening, and it's like, I can't even type this fast, man. But I think we knew that it would be a busy couple days, a hectic week, because it's a coaching change. It's an SEC coach with plenty of guys that were committed to go play in Oxford coming into a new situation in the SEC at LSU, bringing several members of his staff. They're still kind of in the progress of finalizing some of that, which some of the uncertainty there has been interesting for some of these prospects. But you knew there were probably going to be some additions that had connections to these coaches. You knew that was probably not going to bode well for some guys that were already members of this class, as new coaches come in with a new system, new player evaluations, recruiting boards, all those things, and a big old pot of money from which to work on the NIL front. And so for folks that had not kept up, we mentioned two wide receivers from LSU's 2026 class, two in-state guys that decommitted earlier today. Kenny Darby, the airline receiver, has been as prolific a pass catcher as has been in the state the last couple of years. He's, they're out of the playoffs now, so his 2-year total the last couple of years is up over 3,100 just receiving yards. He's also key in their run game this year. They also saw Kervin Johnson Jr., fantastic multi-sport athlete from Tioga, flip to Ole Miss. And earlier today, Jalen Chapman, interior offensive lineman, versatile offensive lineman for Warren Easton, but he was projected primarily as an interior guy at the next level. He backed off of his commitment. He was one of the longest standing commitments going back to last summer with big Rich Anderson. The additions, an offensive lineman, Ryan Moret, 3-star from out of Miami that had been a long-time Ole Miss commitment. Now he's on board for LSU tomorrow. And 4-star tight end J.C. Anderson from up in Illinois, big, you can do the thing or whatever when I say this, but 6'7" tight end. I mean, a big physical guy, but athletic, and someone that was a key piece of that Ole Miss recruiting class, and now is a key piece of LSU's recruiting class, set, it sounds like, to sign on Friday. And there's plenty of other drama to get into that we will, but in terms of the actual movement, all of that was happening during the day. And then Braden Allen, the Lafayette Christian wide receiver, announces his commitment tonight, which it's been a journey, man, but he's going to end up in Baton Rouge for college.
Yeah, he had a long trip. He had a long trip to end up close to home.
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of these are just, they speak to the nature of modern college football. They speak to, I was on the phone with one of the current commits uncles earlier tonight, just kind of talking through some of their anxieties as they wait to hear, okay, what is this final staff going to look like? Are we good? Should we be considering some of these other colleges that are chiming in and calling? And I told him, man, if nothing else, regardless of, hopefully you end up in purple and gold, but if it's, if you even have to consider this stuff, this is why it's important that even if things go a little quiet, don't end things on bad notes. I'm just kind of watching some of the comments come in, which we'll get to some of this Frank Wilson talk here in a second, but make sure that you keep relationships on a positive note, because you never know when a coaching change might happen and what that might mean for you. I mean, guys that are no longer committed to LSU today were about as locked in, including, tweets this morning, were about as locked in as you could be. And so a lot of chaos. And we watched Braden Allen, who we were talking about a second ago, commit to Tulane over some other great options, including some power fours like a Texas Tech. And then all of a sudden, here comes that next wave, and Ole Miss and Oklahoma State, Colorado. And he ultimately decided he didn't want to go to Ole Miss, that Oklahoma was more of the choice for him. And even when LSU offered, he didn't make that move to flip back to LSU. But now Lane Kiffin and company are in Baton Rouge, and it sounds like it just worked out to be the perfect fit for a coaching staff that Braden liked coming to his dream program. And, Captain Planet, their powers combined, that outweighed the Sooners, I guess, down the stretch.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, just, I think people need to, look at bigger picture wise and not kind of just jump in and get emotional about it. As fans, LSU fans and stuff, is that there's a lot going on right now, and there's a lot of uncertainty with the big point of that is the staff. A lot of these kids were recruited by certain staff members. Those are the relationships they had. And now on the fence of who's staying, who's going, they're kind of sitting on the fence going, I don't want to be the one left without a spot. I need to throw my hat back in the ring. So I think I saw a lot of comments. Obviously, never look at the comments, but I saw a lot of comments, particularly some like up north, stuff that, and I'm just like, it's not the kid's decision, and it's not necessarily the staff's decision. It's just a mutual decision, and it's going to be hopefully work out best for everybody.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of instances in recruiting where I see, dude, some fans are so in it and so tapped in and know as well as anyone what's going on and the subtleties of every guy's recruiting process and all those things. And so don't want to completely blanket statement it, but I give the example all the time that I watch fans in comments of guys who are not takes at certain schools, and we'll use LSU as the example because it's the big in-state school, but guys that would love to go play for LSU but don't have that opportunity really, and LSU fans at times in their comments saying you got to come play for LSU and like don't leave the state, and why would you go anywhere else? And I'm just sitting there kind of having a sense of, well, they don't want to, man. Like, you're just kind of rubbing in the fact that that's not an option for them. But there are dynamics at play right now. As you mentioned, anytime you start to talk about some of these things, there's kind of like, in terms of like a coaching change and signing day and all that stuff, there is the potential of multiple pieces of that pie to how we got where we got, and what can be read from it. And I think when you see a lot of Ole Miss offensive staff members seemingly Baton Rouge bound, and you see decommitments from Kenny Darby, Kervin Johnson Jr., Jalen Chapman, that, there's probably something going on there with Brad Davis and Cortez Hankton, and that the likelihood of them being in play moving forward is looking pretty low. And so whether that becomes to some degree of the prospects feeling like that's the guy that I was committed to, that's the position coach that I wanted to go play for, and now that he's gone, they maybe want to look elsewhere. That is a piece of it. But at the same time, like I said, kind of at the top, these are coaches that are coming in with their own recruiting boards and have the guys that they like and they were recruiting and have committed for a reason. And so that's why you see guys like, Jalen Chapman's out of the class, but Ryan Moret, the Miami, Florida offensive lineman, is in. You see Kervin Johnson and Kenny Darby out, but Braden Allen's in, and there's some pursuit of some other notable wide receivers around the country. So, it's been interesting. I feel for the kids, as right. You and you and I are wired the same way. We're out here. We're like on the sidelines on Friday nights. We know all the kids. And so knowing guys that really want to go to a certain place and have been amped up and probably have all of their decorations and everything ready for Wednesday and now are pivoting a little bit, it's kind of a tough deal.
Yeah. And you know, a lot to do with that relationship thing. Like, you know, these kids, it's a big decision for them to make that commitment. You know, when you have all these all these people courting you, and you're trying to make a very hard decision at 17, 18 years old, and you build that trust with that coach that's recruiting you, you know, and then when that's gone, it puts you in a real. So I don't. What I'm getting at is I hope that, you know, LSU fans don't think that, you know, kids are running because they don't want to play there. They might do. It's just not a relationship thing at this point, and they're going to keep their options open.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of flux right now going on where I know that there are certain commits who feel like, and I'm trying to be careful with some of this, I guess, there's certain commits who have been told that they should be fine on Wednesday and to expect that paperwork to show up Wednesday morning and all those things. But their position coaches are saying, yeah, you know, you should come to LSU. I think I will also be here. But I can't necessarily promise that. And so that makes for some interesting situations when there's just that level of uncertainty, which a lot comes back to how jacked up the NCAA calendar is. And you can say what you want about it. It is what it is. And those are the rules you have to play by. And so you've got to do it. But we watched it be chaotic for Lane Kiffin with his decision to come to LSU. We're watching it now be even more challenging for some high school athletes that are having to decide where to go begin their college career with a limited clock on them to play those years, and needing to pick the right fit, and having college coaches that it's important to them to get these guys signed in the early signing period so they can then go into the portal and know what they're working with here in a few weeks. But it makes for a challenging situation for some of these guys to make those choices, for sure. And I know one of the examples, and it's the one that is kind of the most talked about thing going on right now, both in our comment section as well as just around the LSU fan base, is a lot of talk of Frank Wilson and, if he has an opportunity to stay and what his role might look like and what impact that has on this class, because, the Recruit That Boot co-host Sam Spiegelman just reporting tonight, something we've been watching all day long. Rich Anderson, the defensive tackle from Medina Carr, Lamar Brown, the fantastic two-way lineman from U High, both seem like they're kind of putting a pause on signing, at least. Not saying they're backing out of the class, but not necessarily planning to sign on Wednesday as they wait to see how some things develop. And those are two guys, like I was telling you before we got started, that Frank was instrumental in having be a part of this class and stay a part of this class despite every option in the country to work with. And so I see Larry Samuels, and I see, I don't know if you're aware of this follower that we have, but he's my favorite name, probably, Bayou Booty Louisiana Treasures. Those guys are having a conversation in the comments right now about just frustrations with the potential impact that Frank is having right now. Allegedly, I haven't talked to Frank. I haven't talked to the kids to actually say that, but that's kind of the buzz of like what leverage dynamics are going on behind the scenes right now, in that regard. Larry saying he's heard several podcasters like Blake Ruffino over there at I'm going to mess up the name of the group, but Blake Ruffino and Matt Moscona say the same sort of thing. And hearing that potentially Frank could end up back at Ole Miss. Bayou Booty saying, I hope Lane doesn't push out key staff members that have such a strong influence in Louisiana. Larry agreeing. And I agree with you guys. I think that was something that Sam and I talked about at length at times on Recruit That Boot, of there are going to be key members of this staff that are going to be critical to keep in place if you want to maintain this recruiting class. And as much as it's great to see Lane Kiffin and company bringing in new additions that they have longstanding relationships with, there's some pretty solid players that are in or were in this Louisiana or LSU recruiting class, and keeping guys like a Frank Wilson, like a Corey Raymond was going to be critical. And as much as I understand potentially starting fresh from what was a really disappointing year this year, and I know I've talked to coaches who say the best thing for them is to go into a place and kind of burn it down and start from scratch and rebuild the culture. We just watched the last guy in Baton Rouge try to do that, and it failed miserably, and him have to go out and bring some of those guys back. We watched it happen with a Corey Raymond, who's now back on staff and is a key piece of this thing. That I remember when Brian Kelly was hired, some people that were gung-ho supporting all of Brian Kelly's moves and were critical of Corey Raymond and company, just kind of really taking shots at the performance on the field and said it was better for them to be gone and make other moves. And then very quickly you saw that there was something lacking early on under Brian Kelly, and they started having to try and backtrack and, okay, let's go get Corey back. Let's go get Blake Baker back, and so on. And so I think in this situation, Lane has to be aware enough of having watched all that happen to not make the same mistake twice. And particularly when guys like Rich Anderson and Lamar Brown are saying this guy is someone that's really important us being here.
Right. Yeah. And it's a great point about, some of the staff members that have, like, Frank's was a long time coach in the state of Louisiana and he's got great relationships all over the state at different high schools. And, some of those coaches that are, in high school that are developing great talent have been there for a while and have great relationships with Frank Wilson. And so
some of those high school coaches were players under Frank Wilson.
Yeah. So they have a lot of respect for him. And Frank's been there for a long time, or been there for a while, and he's got great relationships all over the state. I think he is a very important person to remain on staff, to kind of liaison the new staff coming in and helping those people develop those relationships.
Yeah, and so he's an interesting piece because a lot of the coaches that are coming in right now we're seeing are on the offensive side of the ball. Defense, the biggest question is, does Blake Baker potentially get the Tulane head coaching job or not? Because it sounds like Lane would like to keep a lot of that defensive staff intact, but Blake was down in New Orleans this week talking to his alma mater about the potential of his first head coaching job, and so I think he would love that job if that were an opportunity for him to be his first head coaching opportunity. But if not, it seems like he would be in Baton Rouge. And that has trickle down and ripple effects of, similarly to Lane wanting to bring his guys in on offense. If there has to be a move made on the defensive side of the ball, does a coordinator coach a certain position primarily? Does he have a certain guy or two that is really important for him to bring in? How does that kind of shake some things up? And so that becomes a piece of this equation too. As much as everyone's focused on Frank, there is that piece of the other side for Rich and Lamar and company.
It's funny, talking about potential of Blake going to Tulane. Well, then there's some guys on that staff that you got to keep around that have long-standing relationships in the state and are very, very critical to the recruitment of players to Tulane, that have helped recruit a lot of great talent to Tulane. It's kind of a long web, of intertwined and, butterfly effect type stuff. But I going back to what, you said about how the timeline, the NCAA timelines are going on right now. And I hate to be one that says, like, as soon as one thing affects my circle, then, we got to blow the whole thing up. It's not working. Well, that timeline's working for 95 schools, in Division I right now, because they're not going through a coaching change. But I think the NCAA needs to look at it right now and see that the massive turnover on coaches right now that are having to leave before playoffs, or signing before playoffs, or coming to agreements, coming to terms before playoffs, and potentially ruining their playoff system, because Lane needed to get to the LSU to really lock in this recruiting class. And I think, but if you push the timeline back, then you have to push the transfer portal back. Then you have to push the second high school signing period back. And I think they need to look at it. I do think they need to look at it. But again, I don't think that they need to blow it all up and completely change everything, the ever-changing rules. It's felt like college recruiting has just kind of every year there's been something new. The transfer portal, then NIL, and then the early signing period. So I think what it's really hurting is the high school players, and because they can't really get a grasp of how the process should work because it's ever changing. It's always changing. But yeah, I do think the NCAA needs to look at this in to save, if not to, for the benefit of the kids, which is what should be the priority, of the athletes should be the priority. But if not for that, to save and keep the college football playoff a good product, because right now it's not going to be a good product because one of your best teams is playing without their whole offensive staff.
Yeah. I mean, I think the playoff in kind of the macro will be fine overall, but it's definitely the Ole Miss storyline is not the dynamic that you want to have for one of those teams going in, obviously. And yet it's a lot of the pieces that have changed in terms of early signing period, transfer portal, NIL, like the college football playoff expanding to 12, the implementation of those things were all kind of for different reasons and from unique directions or whatnot. But I made a comparison with some of it yesterday too, as much as we do with high school sports. The LHSA initially making the select non-select move, and then that turned into, okay, how do we fix this problem? And that fix suddenly became, well, now we created this one, so what do we do with that? And just years of adjustment to where now we're more than a decade into this thing, and they're still trying to tweak and find ways to make it better, which everything is an ongoing process in life. But it's felt like a game of whack-a-mole, of correcting one consequence to then have another to deal with. And I think that we are at a place with some of that type of dynamic going on with the college football calendar. And I know there's a lot of frustration centered on Lane specifically with how a lot of this is going. And I think it's important to point out that Lane was trying to continue coaching that Ole Miss team into the playoffs, but Ole Miss said, why would we let you do that? Why would we let LSU's coach come coach Ole Miss and have this much more time with our players and be a walking advertisement for LSU every time Ole Miss is on the screen. But as much as the focus right now is on Lane, because he's the guy, the big name guy making that jump from one Power 4 program to another, that's just because it's only unprecedented because this is the second year of the 12-team playoff. It's not going to happen all the time, but it is going to happen again. And it's going to be frustrating for some other team or some other combination of teams or whatever. But all of that, neither here nor there. Let's kind of look at where some of this LSU class is now. We're also going to look at some of the movement from some top prospects from around Louisiana and try and not just stick to LSU. It's Louisiana versus all y'all channel, not strictly LSU versus all y'all. But as we mentioned, the developments today were the 3 decommitments, in-state guys. Jalen Chapman of Warren Easton, the big offensive lineman for the Eagles, he's backed off of his LSU pledge. Kenny Darby, the airline wide receiver, he's backed off. He has since picked up an offer from Colorado. He has since said that he will be not signing Wednesday, but will plan to sign this week, planning on Friday to make his next steps known. Curvin Johnson Jr., the Tioga wide receiver, flipped today from LSU to Ole Miss, who offered him yesterday, like shortly before Lane Kiffin's introductory press conference. Same time, the 3 additions of the day so far have been J.C. Anderson, the big tight end from Illinois, Ryan Moret, the offensive lineman from Miami, and the latest Braden Allen, Lafayette Christian, returning all-state wide receiver for the Knights, who will be the new in-state addition. And we wait and see what happens with Lamar Brown and Rich Anderson, who my gut tells me they're both in purple and gold at the next level, but it's just an uneasy feeling to have two guys that, in my opinion, you cannot let leave the state in this recruiting class. To have those two guys have any level of uncertainty going into Wednesday is more uncertainty and anxiety than I would personally want.
Yeah, I think those are two that you have to sign in this class, and you have to do whatever you have to do to get them. I think they're critical to this class. I think, they sign and you'll get, I think, some momentum back with the fan base. It's pretty interesting, the excitement before, and I know we're going to get away from LSU here in a second, but the excitement of the fan base Sunday, Monday, as opposed to today. Now it's kind of an uneasiness, but I think it'll all play out. I think with the resources that the school is giving to Lane Kiffin and staff, that I think they're going to be able to close a lot of these. And I'm interested to see, some surprises tomorrow or, later on in the week, some that we're not, that we haven't really thought about, that were some relationships that had been built before. And then again in February when we do this again. But I, as just as much as LSU's going through, some decommitments and some changes going on right now. Tulane also, obviously with Tylan George, he's going to sign in February. And I'm sure that has to do with a little bit of, let's wait and see who comes in. And I mean, he's a guy for Tulane that I think they have to sign to. He's pretty incredible. Ari Slocum from Union Parish. He decommitted today, I believe. Yeah, today from Arkansas. Yeah, a dynamic player. He plays both ways for Union. Done a great job and been, critical for them to make this push, late in the playoffs. But I don't know if where Arkansas saw him playing offense or defense. I'm assuming it was offense or defense. I'm sorry. That's another with the coaching changes going on. A lot of people having to step back and look at it, and what sucks is, again, for the kids, for the high school athletes coming up, is you have to do what's right for you. But if you step too far back, the transfer portal's coming through, and depending on what a team needs, that spot might not be available in February.
And I missed this earlier, but yesterday I was thinking about it as you and I talk, as you've interviewed Ashton, but Ashton Dawson from Evangel Christian, another two-way guy that was committed to Arkansas. He is now back on the open market. And I think Ashton Dawson and Ari Slocum both kind of mentioned after discussing with Coach Ryan Silverfield. And so it's pretty evident in their phrasing of the situation that this was not necessarily their choice so much as just a new coaching staff coming in. But those are definitely two big ones, two ranked prospects in this class that are now making other moves. You mentioned with Tulane, Tylan George is going to hold off until February. Jackson Williams, another guy that you interviewed just Friday night and was feeling pretty locked in with Tulane because of the coaching change. He's now pushed pause on some of that and taken a step back. And so very interested to see what happens with him now moving forward, both this week and potentially if he ends up taking some more time with it into February.
Yeah. And Ashton, I know for him before, I think they were looking at using him as more of an H-back in the Arkansas offense. And now I'm assuming, that position probably is maybe not be as much of a need, for them. But he's a pretty dang good defensive tackle. So, I know that there'll be more suitors out there for him, and I'm confident that he'll find another home or a better home for him to fit him a little bit better.
Also notable movement this week, not today, but this week, Cole Bergeron, top-ranked quarterback in the class in Louisiana. He backed off of his Virginia Tech commitment. He was someone that had remained committed to Virginia Tech for a while after the early season firing of Brent Pry. Wanted to kind of continue to monitor the opportunity there and see what the relationships look like with the new coach, new coaching staff. But Minnesota and others really ramped up with him. And on Monday, really, I mean, within a span of a couple of hours, right around the same time, Virginia Tech gets a quarterback commitment from a guy that had been a long-time Penn State commitment under James Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, whether that be Virginia Tech kind of pushing Cole out or Cole and his family kind of reading the writing on the wall and seeing that there might be a better opportunity elsewhere, he reopens things heading into this week. And so that's another of the big notable actual movements in or out of a class so far the last couple of days.
And I know he was on the road this week.
Oh yeah, that's why I was wondering why you were smiling. You saw him at the airport. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw, and he was a little bit in front of me, but I was dragging my daughter through the Charlotte airport. So he was visiting somewhere where that's a hub, but I didn't get a chance to catch up to him and talk to him. And but he's a great kid. I think he's going to be fine too. Another kid that I think is going to have plenty of suitors, and I think he's going to find a home that's going to fit him, and he's going to be able to develop a relationship prior to it. It is interesting the flip side when you've built relationships with somebody. Well, so on with Lane Kiffin and company coming to LSU, they've built relationships. Those are the guys, So it's just interesting to see, kind of both sides of it.
And a few other in-state guys, and then we can kind of run down as we kind of wrap up, run down the list and kind of say what the latest is on some of the top prospects around the state. But ULM added a commitment of another guy that you recently interviewed on Louisiana versus All Y'all, Christian Pani, the running back from West Monroe, is going to be staying close to home and going to take that big bruising running ability over to the Warhawks, where they could certainly use him and were, predicated on running the football, which has to be music to Christian's ears to go join that offense. Zachary linebacker Isaiah Stokes, a guy that will be up in that area this week as the Broncos go play a semifinal against Ruston. He had recently flipped a commitment to ULM. He stepped back from that, decommitted on, I guess, earlier today from that ULM commitment. And so notable news there for the Warhawks for sure. And then two guys that really well, also up there in North Louisiana, that the only new news is that they're not going to be signing this week. They're going to be holding off. And two guys that I've had ranked in the top 20 in the class around the state for a long, long time. Offense, Ouachita defensive lineman Dylan Berryman, Big Dill, and Jamarcier Plater, the running back, record-setting running back from Captain Shreve, a guy that we've watched do an awful lot of different things on the football field, defensive back, pass catcher, running back, just, a little track speed ball of muscle on the football field for the Gators. A one-time Wake Forest commitment. Dylan was a one-time Texas commitment. Both those guys recently backing off of those pledges and now looking elsewhere, and we'll have until February to figure it all out.
And I think, sometimes in some situations, waiting till February is good for some high school athletes. I think it's going to work out for Jamarcier. I think when a lot of this dust settles, that he will again, just like some of the other ones, he will find a good place for him. He's an amazing talent. He is a big ball of muscle, and he can go. He was a big key, big time player for Shreve. They had to really rely on him this year and for their success as a team. But, I'm interested to see where he does end up. I know Colorado was a little bit in the mix there for a second. And then that was kind of short-lived. I think they had two commitments right off within a couple weeks of them offering him. So I'm confident he'll find a good home before February. And Dylan, he's kind of had an interesting recruitment. He's kind of been all over. And I'm interested to see when the dust settles again with some of these staffs that are kind of getting into place where he ends up. And I'm looking forward to, I'll be at Ouachita or at Neville to catch Dylan play Neville this week. This should be a good one. I'm pretty excited about that one. I've been to Bill Ruppel Stadium.
Ruppel,
I think twice this year, and it's a good atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a really good atmosphere.
I caught the Evangel game, and then when they played Ruston.
Yeah, I used to be there a few times a week when I was back at the New Star up in Monroe. Had a chance to get back up there to end this regular season when Alexandria went up there, and Coach Thomas Bachman said flat out he thought the atmosphere of the situation kind of affected his guys at times. And so I know Neville's excited to have that one at their place, even though it's a short trip for Ouachita. That home field advantage should still mean something. But Dylan's going to be interesting to watch on the recruiting front. He's someone that, again, was a one-time Texas commit early on in his process. I thought he was probably ending up at LSU, and it just didn't really fall that way. And then USC was involved. Mississippi State was involved. Purdue was in the mix. He committed
Purdue, yep.
Yeah, he committed to Texas earlier this year. Ole Miss stayed on him heavily, which is of note for folks here watching. LSU sounded like they were maybe back in the equation a little bit over the past month or so. But now there's coaching changes at both places. Some of those Ole Miss coaches are in Baton Rouge, but a lot of the defensive coaches who would have been the ones primarily recruiting Dylan are remaining in Oxford. And so, how do things play out for Dylan? Is LSU a potential landing spot for him in February? Is Ole Miss, is there a resurgence of a Purdue or someone new that kind of comes into the fold if they miss on someone else over the next couple of days? And so he's a talented enough and sought after enough guy that I think it's going to work out fine for him as some of these other dominoes fall into place and boards kind of clear up a little bit and teams realize, okay, well, we didn't get this defensive lineman. Let's go make that move on the Berryman kid. And similarly, for Jamarcier, it sounds like Louisiana Tech and Memphis have been two that are potentially in the equation a little bit. And I think those would be really viable spots for him. But if someone misses on a running back elsewhere around the country, maybe there's an opportunity that a new suitor comes into play here.
Yeah, the Louisiana Tech is interesting to me just because that would be a heck of a running back haul for Sonny Cumbie and company if they could pull Jamarcier and Kenny Thomas from North Dakota. That'd be a great running back duo, in one class that I think that would help them out tremendously going forward.
Wrapping it up, even despite the developments, the movement, I was going to say despite some of kind of the frustrating losses, but as we mentioned, some of these are kind of choice departures from the class. Despite all of that, LSU maintains commitments from many of the top prospects in the class that, looking at the Louisiana Versal prospect rankings for 2026, Lamar Brown and Richard Anderson have long been kind of 1A and 1B for us. And both of those guys, despite some of the pause on things, remain LSU commits and members of this class. Jabari Mack of Destrehan sounds like he's still set to sign at 1 p.m. is when they'll celebrate. I don't know if he'll send his stuff in earlier than that or if they'll send it in the afternoon, but he sounds like he's still a member of this class. Aiden Hall, Big Rich's teammate from Edna Carr, sounds like he's still good to go. Bryson Martinez from East Ascension, a guy I have not seen decommit, but I know Texas and others have really pushed heavily for him. So he's one that LSU fans need to keep a close eye on Wednesday to see what happens. Kenny Darby, we mentioned decommitment earlier today. Colorado into the mix. Someone to watch on Friday when he makes his announcement, but the Buffaloes are a team that seems like makes a lot of sense right now, just kind of the timeline of the way some things played out today. Pook Ellis, hope all is well with him still. I mean, as long as Corey Raymond is in the mix here, Pook should have a home in Baton Rouge and one that I know he's really excited about. He said he's still signing on Wednesday, and what a great day for that Winsboro community to have their first Franklin Parish signee with LSU. The first guy from the local high school to sign since back when Booger did so decades ago.
Booger McFarland. Yep.
Hayward Howard Jr. we'll see tomorrow morning over at Edna Carr, which is where I'll be for signing day. He remains a Texas commit. Isaiah Washington, LSU commit, but a guy that Tulane was very involved in his recruitment at one point. He's got some great relationships there. And so the fact that John Summerall is now at Florida makes for kind of an interesting piece of the equation to watch. Could Florida, I know Florida is interested and has made some push there, but Isaiah has been a really strong LSU commit. Does that change with any of the uncertainty going on with some of this coaching staff? Dylan Berryman, we just talked about, he's waiting till February. Roderick Tesno Jr. remains committed to USC. Jamichael Garrett, another interesting guy because he is committed to Ole Miss despite being right here in the Baton Rouge area and having a lot of affinity for LSU. So does anything change for him at the last minute? Sounds like he's still set to sign with the Rebels, but definitely someone to kind of put in the back of your mind a little bit going into Wednesday. Darius McKinley, he got his flip out of the way last week, flipped to Ohio State, fresh off of that visit up there to Columbus. Blaze Thomas, the offensive lineman from Catholic Baton Rouge, is committed to Stanford. Ja'Kai Anderson from Edna Carr to SMU. I'm just rattling down our top 20 at least right now. Chris Anderson, Pook's teammate, Michigan State. Haven't talked to him. I'm not positive. I imagine he's still planning to make a move on Wednesday, but he's committed to Michigan State. Jamarcier, we just talked about. Juju Burns up at Neville, who you will also see on Friday, committed to North Carolina. Tyrone Morgan, fantastic defensive lineman from Woodlawn of Baton Rouge. He'll sign Wednesday afternoon with Baylor. I'm going to try and get over there. I know he's super excited about joining the Bears class tomorrow officially. We might as well give it the top 25 because Trez Davis is someone that we need to talk about. One of the highest or fastest risers over the course of this, a guy that has had a very similar recruiting process to Braden Allen in a lot of ways, where he committed to Tulane this summer and then caught a surge of new Power 4 interest. Trez just decommitted about a week ago, fresh off a visit to Washington. I know Houston and Kentucky and Baylor and others had been in the mix with him. Would be super interested if LSU tried to make some sort of a late play, because I think Trez is a fantastic football player that is going to be a rankings riser for us at Louisiana versus all y'all. And so he's worth watching tomorrow and beyond potentially. We mentioned Jackson Williams decommitting from Shaw, Jalen Chapman decommitting from LSU, Cole Bergeron decommitting from Virginia Tech. And we have Nathan Green, an athlete from Huntington, who we have still committed to Louisiana Tech. But that's our top 25. Anyone that you want to share any notes for? I know you're kind of tapped in, particularly with some of the Shreveport and North Louisiana guys. Anyone that you're kind of watching closely heading into tomorrow?
Not necessarily, but I am kind of excited about Christian Pawnee committing to ULM. You know, I've always felt like ULM has not really recruited this I-20 corridor
100%
very well up until, you know, I feel like a couple years ago when I looked at their roster, they had maybe 4 players from the Monroe area, and 3 of them had transferred back into there. So, I think they're trying to make a better effort to kind of at least visit and be seen. But I think Sonny Cumbie and the staff there have done a great job recruiting this I-20 corridor. Kenny, like I talked about, Kenny Thomas from North Dakota, Nate Green from Huntington, Johnny Casey Jr. from Evangel. Just some really solid athletes, you know, right down the road that are going to put butts in seats in the stadium, and people are going to be excited to watch them. Local guys, and Tech has had pretty good success this year, and I think there's some excitement in the program, and I think that when athletes in this North area are getting offers from Tech, they're excited about it again. Yeah, I forgot what else I was going to say. But while you were going down that list talking about, you know, who's still committed, And again, Lamar Brown and Richard Anderson are both still committed to LSU. They just decided not to sign tomorrow and kind of wait. And I think that's important for LSU fans to see, to know, that the sky is not falling, that the sun will come up tomorrow, that just sit back and wait and see what happens. Same thing with Tulane. It's going to be very interesting. I'm almost just as interested in seeing how the Tulane class shakes up and kind of settles down here in a little bit, with when they hire, when they make a hire and they got their guy and they can put that staff together, and what relationships those coaches have with players in the area, all at all four corners of the state. So I'm pretty excited about watching the Tulane class kind of get back together. But again, the sky's not falling for either program in the recruiting game. I think, there's still key pieces committed, and I think there's still key pieces that will eventually sign. They just need to see what's going to happen first.
Yeah, it's going to be critical to land Lamar Brown and Rich Anderson, though. And so I understand the anxieties. I have more anxieties with the situation than I would like to tonight, because those are two guys that I don't think you can leave the state. I remain confident that they will ultimately sign with LSU, but it's a little bit less certain ground on Tuesday night than LSU or its fans or anyone would like to have. It's also part of the beauty of being Lamar Brown or Richard Anderson, because as much as we talked about earlier on, college coaches that tell prospects, look, if you don't sign in December, we might not have that spot for you in February. So like, you're either in December or you're out. Rich and Lamar can go wherever the hell they want in February. That leverage does not exist for the college coaches when it comes to those guys, because you would be crazy to not take those guys in February, whether you're LSU or anyone else. And there's a level of whether or not college coaches want to understand wanting to hold off on a decision. There is a level of understandability of, hey, we want to know who the hell our position coaches are going to be and make sure that we're in like a good spot heading into this thing for maybe the next year, but ideally for the next 3 to 5 years. Going back through that LSU class, which again, I texted with you before, that's going to be where people are going to be most locked in and have most anxiety about. And Lamar Brown and Richard Anderson are the two headliners of that. We've talked about them at length. Deuce Gerald's another fantastic 4-star prospect, a Louisiana guy, at least in terms of family, with his dad having played at Scotlandville, but Deuce has grown up out in Georgia. He announced, I don't remember if it was earlier today or yesterday, he's still locked in, ready to go, signing with LSU this week. Trenton Henderson, I have not heard any news concerning him potentially heading elsewhere. The Pensacola Catholic edge rusher from out there in Florida, Bryson Martinez, we just talked about. He's someone to watch for sure for LSU fans. The East Ascension tight end, big athletic tight end offensive lineman that played tight end for East Ascension this year and was all over the place. Haven Finney Jr., defensive back from Los Angeles area out in California. He's someone that wants to be in Baton Rouge, I believe, still, but Corey Raymond is a huge piece of that conversation. From the first time talking to Haven 2.5 years ago, whenever the hell it was, the admiration he has for Corey Raymond is huge. Jabari Mack, Destrehan, versatile, physical wide receiver and athlete. He's still locked in and signing on Wednesday. Dylan Perger, defensive back from Booker T. Washington in Alabama. He's someone to watch. I know there's some late push with him. There might be some movement. Aiden Hall, the safety from Edna Carr, as I mentioned, locked in. Bryson Cooley is going to be interesting, just as we've watched happen to this point with Jalen Chapman already out of the class, Bryson Martinez looking around, Bryson Cooley from Laurel, Mississippi, an offensive lineman. I know Ole Miss was certainly had him on their radar out there in these coaches' previous programs' home state. Can they keep him on board, or does he potentially flip back to to a Mississippi State or somewhere. Just keep an eye on Bryson Cooley as a not a state guy. Isaiah Washington up at Haynesville mentioned wants to be at LSU, but there's certainly some interesting new curveballs for him to consider with John Summerall on his way out to Florida. Pook Ellis, we talked about some as well, and that's kind of where some of this is, as well as obviously the two new additions I mentioned before, J.C. Anderson, the tight end from Illinois, and Ryan Moret, the offensive lineman from Miami, Florida.
And then I'd like to add two that I think, might be interested to watch going into tomorrow, and if there's any more developments or anything, it would be Emmanuel Tucker from New Albany, Mississippi, currently an Ole Miss commit, offensive tackle, 4-star. And
one-time LSU commit who then flipped to Ole Miss, and now his then Ole Miss coaches are back in Baton Rouge. So very interesting to watch.
That will be one to watch, and then also Carmelo Reed from Chicago area, another 6'7" edge rusher.
Yeah, man, big defensive lineman that's going to be choosing between the Rebels and Tigers tomorrow. A guy that both programs had offered previously, and he was happy to announce, I believe it was earlier today, that he had now been reoffered by the new staff at LSU, and seems like someone that LSU fans should definitely be watching for his commitment during, I think it's like the middle of the day.
I think 3:15. I believe that's, and I think Chicago's Eastern time or Central time. So
yeah, it's
3:15 local for our Louisiana folks. He announced on Twitter that he'll be choosing between LSU and Ole Miss tomorrow. So definitely one to watch kind of later on in the day.
I'm trying to think of some others of note. The other decommitments that we saw from Ole Miss are definitely all going to be guys to watch. Trey Collins and Corey Barber Jr., safety from Mississippi and a wide receiver from Alabama are two guys that I know had some interest in LSU during the course of this process and were very quick to decommit on Sunday when the news came out that Lane Kiffin was indeed heading to Baton Rouge. Ole Miss offered, LSU offered Jaquaden Guilford an Ohio State commitment from up in Indiana. LSU offered on Monday. He's a guy that Ole Miss was very much involved in his recruitment before he picked the Buckeyes. Jamison Powell, wide receiver from California, decommitted from Ole Miss on Monday, so another one certainly to watch. You already mentioned Carmelo. Jace Matthews, Mississippi wide receiver, Auburn commitment, LSU back in the fold for him a little bit. He's someone that A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, and Auburn were all in the fold for him before he committed to Auburn earlier this summer. And so it sounds like he's another guy to watch here heading into Sonic Day.
And far reach, Tristan Keys, though. That would be interesting. And, a Mississippi guy that has ties to Louisiana was once a commit, I believe, early on in the process.
Yeah, he was.
I think that would be a big surprise, but again, the sky's not falling. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, man. Tristan, I haven't heard much about movement wise, but he's someone that just from a nature of kind of like a higher national scale Braden Allen, like if you just look at the dynamic that happened with Braden, where he liked some things at Ole Miss, he liked some of those coaches clearly, but didn't necessarily want to be at Ole Miss for whatever other reasons, and had interest in LSU, grew up loving LSU, thought that was the dream school, but that didn't quite check all the boxes. And so at one point he's committed to Oklahoma, and now he sees kind of the best of both worlds of some of the things he liked going on at Ole Miss, but at an LSU. Could that possibly be a sales pitch to a Tristan Keys, who we've both been around? I think you've been around some of those tournaments where we had him on the 7-on-7 trail. Monster. Fantastic. You watched him as like a sophomore in high school on the 7-on-7 circuit and said, well, that's probably a high round NFL draft pick in a few years. But Could that be a sales pitch to Tristan from Mississippi? Liked Ole Miss through some of this process. Obviously had a lot of love for LSU. Are there enough of those pieces now in place? Again, kind of the Captain Planet dynamic of the powers combined. Does LSU now offer enough of that to sway him? It's just something interesting to watch. But again, I haven't heard anything of movement there.
I'm sure, you know, the call's been placed, you know, whether or not, you know, but I'm sure, you know, this late in the game, already have a relationship, you know, I'm sure it'd be crazy to happen, but I'm just saying.
I'd love it.
I'd love it. I would love it. I wouldn't be mad about it. That's for sure.
No, not at all. I don't think anyone in Louisiana would be mad about it. A lot of folks up on Rocky Top would not be too keen on the dynamic, but you know, they're not here. They're not part of Louisiana for us. We want the Louisiana fans to be happy, man. Well, yeah, I have probably already eaten more of your time than you had bargained for getting into some of this, and I also don't know what I've missed since we've been on, so I need to tap back into some of that a little bit more and see what the latest is on some of these things. But I think we covered a lot of these bases, and there are certainly an awful lot of bases to be covered. Yeah, I've just got college guys sending me transfer portal notes, but not guys that are going to end up at LSU or Tulane or La Tech or whatever. So we'll worry about that a little bit later. Thank you, Jacob, for talking through some of this with me.
I appreciate you having me. I'm you know, unfortunately Sam was busy, but you got the Temu version.
Yeah, we'll get you worked into shape. I know you want to do some more shows and stuff here in the future, and that's going to be part of the plan as we continue to expand Louisiana versus all y'all. So yeah, folks, get used to this big goofy guy's face. You can't see his ears, but he's got them. He's Jacob Coltson. Again, he's doing some great stuff, helping out, getting some coverage in North Louisiana, particularly on the Louisiana versus all y'all channel. I'm Jerit Roser. I think folks that are watching the Louisiana versus all y'all channel probably know who I am a little bit, but thank y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all to Chase, Larry, and Bayou Booty for all chiming in at different points of this. You know, keep your head on a swivel and try and keep that anxiety as managed as possible heading into signing day. It's signing day. It wouldn't be signing day without some chaos, and we, you know, unfortunately have more of it than usual this year. But keep up with Louisiana versus all y'all. We'll keep y'all posted. Y'all have a great night. See y'all tomorrow.